The evening air in Willow Creek carried the gentle warmth of late summer, and the soft chorus of cicadas drifted through the open windows of the small farmhouse on Maple Ridge Road. Inside the kitchen, the light above the table flickered faintly, illuminating a space that had once felt welcoming but now seemed strained by quiet tension. Lena Carter stood near the counter, her arms folded tightly across her chest as if holding herself together. At 23, she carried a restless energy that had nowhere to go, and the narrow walls of the house felt smaller with every passing day. Across the room, Daniel Hayes leaned against the sink. Most people in town called him Ducky, a nickname that had followed him since childhood and never quite faded. At 25, he had the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who spent long hours fixing engines and machinery, yet his quiet demeanor made him appear almost hesitant inside his own home. He watched Lena carefully, sensing the storm building behind her steady gaze. The argument had started over something trivial, though neither of them could clearly remember the exact moment it had shifted into something heavier. Lena had been searching through the hallway closet for an old notebook when a dusty camera case tumbled onto the floor. She had picked it up slowly, brushing the dust away with her sleeve. The sight of it had stopped her breath. Now the camera sat on the kitchen table between them. "You haven't touched it in 2 years," Lena said, her voice tight. Ducky looked at the camera and then back at her. "I thought you didn't want it anymore." "That's not the point." Her words were sharp, but beneath them lingered a deeper frustration that had been growing for months. Lena ran a hand through her dark hair, packing the small kitchen as if the floor itself might offer answers. "When we first met, I told you what I wanted," she continued. "I told you about the city, about studying photography, about traveling." Ducky nodded slowly. "I remember." "But look at us now," she said, gesturing around the room. "We're stuck here doing the same thing every single day." The farmhouse had belonged to Ducky's father before he passed away, and after the wedding, Lena had moved in with him without much hesitation. At the time, it felt like the beginning of something hopeful. They had been young and optimistic, convinced that love alone could shape the future. Reality, however, had settled into quieter routines. Every morning, Ducky woke before sunrise and drove to the mechanical workshop on the edge of town. He spent long hours repairing tractors and farm equipment for neighboring farms. By the time he returned home, exhaustion clung to him like dust. Dinner conversations often faded into silence, not because he meant to ignore Lena, but because words rarely came easily to him. Lena, on the other hand, had always lived with her thoughts moving faster than the world around her. She had once spent nights editing photographs and dreaming about galleries and travel journals. Willow Creek, with its slow rhythms and familiar faces, had gradually begun to feel like a cage. Ducky rubbed the back of his neck. "I know things haven't been exciting lately," he said carefully. "That's not what I'm talking about," Lena replied. She stopped packing and looked directly at him. Her eyes carried a mix of anger and disappointment that made Ducky shift uneasily. "You don't listen," she said. "I do." "You hear me," she corrected, "but you don't listen." Ducky opened his mouth as if to respond, but the words stalled before reaching the surface. His silence only deepened the frustration already filling the room. Lena laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "See, this is exactly what I mean." Outside, the fading sunlight stretched across the fields behind the house, turning the tall grass gold. From the porch came the distant hum of a passing truck on the highway, the only sign of movement in the quiet countryside. Inside the kitchen, the air felt heavier by the second. Lena picked up the camera and turned it over in her hands. The metal edges caught the light, reminding her of the excitement she once felt every time she lifted it to her eye. For a moment she imagined the busy streets of a city, the endless possibilities of new faces and stories waiting to be captured. Instead, she saw the same kitchen walls she had looked at every day for 2 years. "I used to believe we were building something," she said quietly. Ducky straightened slightly. "We are." "Are we?" The question lingered between them. He stepped closer to the table, resting his palms against the wood. "Lena, I'm working hard so we can." "So we can what?" she interrupted. Her voice cracked now, the frustration finally spilling over. "So we can keep living exactly like this." Ducky hesitated. His instinct was always to stay calm, to let the anger pass rather than push against it. Yet the distance growing between them felt impossible to ignore. "I thought this was what you wanted," he said. Lena stared at him, stunned by the words. You thought I wanted to give up everything, she asked. That's not what I meant. But that's what happened. Her grip tightened around the camera before she gently placed it back on the table. The small thud echoed louder than expected. I feel like I disappeared somewhere along the way, she continued, like the person I used to be doesn't exist anymore. Ducky looked down at the floor. The truth was he had noticed her unhappiness long ago, but every attempt to address it seemed to slip away before becoming real conversation. He believed that if he worked harder, if he provided stability, things would eventually improve. Instead, the gap between them had quietly widened. Lena took a slow breath, steadying herself. I can't keep pretending this is enough, she said. Ducky's eyes lifted again. Something in her tone made his chest tighten with sudden unease. What are you saying? Lena reached for the chair and pulled it back, sitting down as though preparing to deliver a verdict. I've been thinking about this for weeks, she said. The cicadas outside grew louder as the last traces of daylight faded beyond the hills. Finally, she looked at him with a calmness that felt more frightening than anger. I'll leave at dawn, Lena said. I'm done with this marriage. The words settled into the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Ducky did not shout or argue. He simply stood there, absorbing the sentence as if it were a physical weight pressing against his chest. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. Lena waited for a reaction, an attempt to stop her, a plea, anything. Instead, Ducky slowly nodded. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the back door, disappearing into the quiet darkness outside. Lena remained at the table, staring at the camera resting beneath the flickering light, wondering why his silence felt far more unsettling than any argument could have been. Lena remained at the kitchen table long after the back door closed behind Ducky. The quiet that followed felt unnatural, as though the house itself had paused to listen to what would happen next. The camera rested in front of her, its lens reflecting the dim light above the table. She stared at it without touching it, replaying the moment she had spoken the words that ended their marriage. Outside, the porch creaked faintly as Ducky stepped down onto the gravel path. His footsteps faded slowly into the warm summer night. For several minutes, Lena didn't move. Her heart beat steadily, yet a strange hollowness settled in her chest. She had imagined this moment many times during sleepless nights. In those thoughts, she felt relief, even excitement. Now the feeling was more complicated. She finally stood and walked toward the hallway. The small farmhouse was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chorus of insects outside. Every room looked the same as it had earlier that day, but everything seemed different now that she had decided to leave. In the bedroom, she opened the closet and pulled down an old suitcase from the top shelf. The zipper scraped loudly in the quiet room. Lena placed it on the bed and began folding clothes with mechanical focus. Each shirt and pair of jeans felt like another step away from the life she had built with Ducky. Yet the memories attached to those simple things were impossible to ignore. A faded blue sweater reminded her of a cool evening when they had watched a movie on the porch. A pair of hiking boots brought back the memory of a long walk through the fields behind the house during their first autumn together. Lena shook her head and pushed the thoughts aside. She reached for her phone and opened her messages. The screen illuminated the dark room as she typed a short text to her best friend, Brooks. I'm leaving in the morning. Are you still okay with me staying for a while? The reply arrived almost immediately. Of course, I told you my couch is yours whenever you need it. Lena exhaled slowly. Lived in a city large enough to offer opportunities Lena had never found in Willow Creek. The thought of crowded streets and busy filled her with a cautious sense of hope. She typed another message, this time to her older brother Noah Carter. I finally told him I'm leaving tomorrow. Noah had always been protective of her, and he had never been fully convinced that her marriage had been the right choice. His response came a few minutes later. Come stay with me if things get messy. You deserve better than feeling trapped. Lena placed the phone on the bed. The word trapped echoed in her thoughts, reinforcing the decision she had just made. Downstairs, the kitchen light still glowed faintly beneath the doorframe. She wondered briefly whether Ducky had returned without her noticing, but when she walked down the hallway, the house remained empty. She stepped onto the back porch. The air carried the earthy scent of warm soil and cut grass. Fireflies drifted slowly across the yard, blinking like distant stars near the fence line. The gravel driveway stretched toward the road, but but Ducky's old pickup truck was gone. Lena leaned against the railing and folded her arms. Part of her had expected him to fight harder, to challenge her decision or demand an explanation. Instead, he had simply nodded and walked away. His calm reaction lingered in her mind like an unsolved question. "Maybe he's relieved," she muttered quietly. The possibility stung more than she wanted to admit. After a few minutes, she returned inside and continued packing. The suitcase gradually filled with clothes, notebooks, and a few framed photographs she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. She paused when she reached the small wooden drawer beside the bed. Inside rested several memory cards from her old photography projects. She picked one up and turned it between her fingers. There had been a time when she carried a camera everywhere she went, capturing ordinary moments as if they were pieces of art waiting to be discovered. Those days felt far away now, buried beneath routines that had slowly replaced her ambitions. Lena slipped the memory cards into her bag and closed the drawer. By the time she finished packing, the house had grown even quieter. The clock in the hallway showed nearly midnight. She brushed her teeth and changed into a loose shirt before climbing into bed. Sleep, however, refused to come easily. Her thoughts wandered through the years she had spent with Ducky. She remembered their first meeting at the Willow Creek County Fair, when he had awkwardly offered to carry her camera bag after noticing its broken strap. She remembered the shy smile he gave whenever she teased him about his nickname. Those memories felt warm and genuine, yet they clashed painfully with the frustration that had grown between them. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into a restless sleep. While Lena slept upstairs, Ducky drove along the quiet road leading into town. The headlights of his pickup cut through the darkness, illuminating stretches of empty pavement and rows of sleeping houses. His grip on the steering wheel remained steady, though his thoughts churned with urgency. He parked beside the small diner near the town square. The neon sign glowed softly against the dark sky, casting pale reflections across the windows. Inside, a few late-night customers sat scattered among the booths. Behind the counter stood Hayes, wiping a glass with a towel. She looked up when the door opened and immediately recognized her son. "Daniel," she said, surprised, "what are you doing here this late?" Ducky slid onto a stool at the counter. "I needed to talk," he replied quietly. Studied his face for a moment. Years of raising him had taught her how to read the emotions. He rarely spoke aloud. "What happened?" Ducky hesitated before answering. "Lena leaving in the mornings." Placed the glass down slowly. "Are you sure?" "She told me tonight." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distant hum of the refrigerator and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen filled the silence. Finally sighed. "You love that girl more than you say," she said gently. Ducky stared at the counter. "I know. Then what are you going to do about it?" He lifted his eyes, and something determined flickered behind them. "I'm not going to argue with her," he said. Raised an eyebrow. "Then how will you stop her from leaving?" Ducky reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I'm going to show her something instead." Unfolded the paper and scanned what was written there. As she read, her expression slowly shifted from concern to quiet understanding. When she looked back at him, a faint smile appeared. "Well," she said softly, "if that doesn't make her stay, nothing will." Ducky stood from the stool and headed for the door. The night air felt warmer than before as he stepped outside. He climbed into his truck and started the engine again, his mind fixed on the plan forming ahead. If Lena intended to leave at dawn, then dawn would be the moment he finally revealed everything he had been preparing in silence. The eastern horizon began to glow with the faintest hint of morning when Lena stirred awake. A pale band of light slipped through the bedroom curtains, painting quiet shapes across the wall. For a moment she lay still, unsure why her chest felt so heavy. Then the memory of the previous evening returned with sudden clarity. She was leaving. Lena sat up slowly and glanced around the room that had been her home for 2 years. The suitcase rested beside the dresser exactly where she had left it, half leaning against the wall. Everything looked unchanged, yet the decision she had made the night before had altered the meaning of every object in the room. She stood and dressed without hesitation, pulling on jeans and a light shirt. The early morning air carried a soft warmth through the open window, and birds had begun their quiet songs across the fields. Summer mornings in Willow Creek were usually peaceful, but today the calm felt strange and distant. After brushing her hair, Lena lifted the suitcase and walked down the hallway. The wooden floor creaked faintly beneath her steps. When she reached the kitchen doorway, she stopped. The room was empty. Ducky was nowhere in sight. The chair he normally used at breakfast sat pushed neatly beneath the table, and the counter was clear except for a single envelope resting near the center. Her name was written across the front in large, uneven letters. Lena set the suitcase down and picked up the envelope. The paper felt slightly rough beneath her fingers. She hesitated briefly before opening it. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Before you go, follow the path behind the barn, just once, Ducky." She read the sentence twice. A small frown crossed her face. The message felt strangely simple, almost childlike. Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely and continue with her plan to leave before the town fully woke. Yet curiosity tugged at her thoughts. Lena stepped outside onto the porch. The sky had shifted from deep blue to soft shades of gold, and the rising sun cast long shadows across the grass. The barn stood a short distance away near the edge of the property, its weathered red boards glowing warmly in the morning light. For a moment, she considered turning back. Then she noticed something unusual. A thin rope stretched from the fence near the barn door to a wooden post several yards away. Small pieces of paper hung along it, moving gently in the breeze. Confused, Lena walked closer. As she approached, she realized the papers were photographs. They had been clipped carefully to the rope with small clothespins, forming a line that continued past the barn and into the open field beyond. The sight stopped her mid-step. Lena reached out and lifted the first photograph. It showed a familiar scene from years earlier, the Willow Creek County Fair. Bright lights glowed behind the crowd, and in the center of the picture, she recognized herself laughing beside a booth decorated with balloons. Her hair had been pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she was holding a camera up to her face. On the white border beneath the image, a sentence had been written in careful handwriting. "This was the night I first noticed your smile." Lena's fingers tightened slightly around the photograph. She moved to the next one. The second image captured a quiet moment beside a roadside diner during one of their early road trips. Lena sat on the hood of Ducky's truck, adjusting the lens of her camera while the sunset glowed behind her. Another note appeared below it. "You said this light was perfect." A slow breath escaped her. The third photograph showed her asleep on the living room couch, with several photo prints scattered across the floor. A blanket had been draped over her shoulders, and the warm lamplight created a peaceful glow. Below it, Ducky had written, "You stayed up all night editing." Lena lowered the photograph and stared down the lines stretching across the yard. Each image captured a moment she had nearly forgotten. They were not professional pictures or carefully staged scenes. Most looked as though they had been taken quickly, sometimes slightly crooked, yet every one carried a piece of their shared past. She continued walking. Another photo showed her crouched in the tall grass behind the house while trying to photograph a butterfly. Beneath it, Ducky had written, "You said small things matter." The next displayed a blurry shot of her laughing during a rainstorm while holding her camera under a jacket. The note read, "You said every day has a story." Lena's eyes began to sting. The rope of photographs guided her past the barn and into the open field where wild grass swayed gently in the morning breeze. The sunlight grew brighter with each step, illuminating the final stretch ahead. At the end of the line stood a small wooden table. Beside it waited Ducky. He stood quietly with his hands resting at his sides, watching her approach. His posture was steady, though tension flickered across his face. Lena slowed as she reached the last photograph. This one showed a simple image of the empty field at sunset. The sky burned with orange and pink clouds above the rolling grass. Below it, he had written only a few words. "You said this place could be beautiful." Her gaze lifted from the photograph to the table beside him. Resting at its center was a sleek black camera. The model was unmistakable. Lena had once spent hours studying it online, memorizing every detail and feature. It was the exact camera she had dreamed of owning when she believed photography might become her future. She stared at it in disbelief. Ducky finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I know I'm not good with words." Lena said nothing. I thought about arguing last night, he continued, but that wouldn't fix anything. He gestured toward the photographs hanging behind her. So I decided to show you something instead. Lena's heart pounded softly as she looked again at the camera. Ducky stepped closer to the table. I've been saving for it, he said, for months. She felt the ground shift beneath her understanding. I didn't want you to give up what you love, he added. I just didn't know how to help. The sunlight brightened around them as the sun climbed above the horizon. Lena's fingers hovered over the camera but did not touch it yet. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. You did all this for me. Ducky nodded once, but he wasn't finished. There's one more thing you should know before you decide to leave. Lena looked up at him again, unsure what he meant. Ducky drew a slow breath. Then he revealed the final part of the plan he had been quietly building in the background. Lena's eyes remained fixed on Ducky as the morning sun climbed higher above the horizon. The light spread slowly across the field, illuminating the tall grass and the long trail of photographs behind her. She could still feel the weight of the camera resting on the table between them, though she had not yet touched it. Ducky drew a steady breath, as though gathering the courage to finish what he had begun. There's something else, he said quietly. Lena waited. I went to see Mr. Mercer last night. The name stirred a memory immediately. Julian Mercer owned the small photography studio in Willow Creek, the same place where Lena had once taken weekend classes while she was still dreaming about building a career behind the lens. He remembers you, Ducky continued. He remembers how serious you were about photography. Lena frowned slightly, unsure where the conversation was leading. I asked him if he would meet with you, Ducky said. He agreed to give you a chance at the studio, an internship to start. The words hung in the warm air. Lena felt her breath catch as the meaning settled in. For a moment she simply stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. You did that, she asked quietly. Ducky nodded. I told him you were leaving town, he explained, but I also told him you deserved an opportunity before making that decision. Lena looked down at the camera again. The sleek black body gleamed softly under the rising sunlight, a silent reminder of the dreams she had pushed aside. I thought you didn't care about any of this, she admitted. Ducky shifted his weight slightly, his expression uneasy but honest. I cared, he said. I just thought giving you a stable life was enough. Lena looked out across the field. The early light turned the grass into waves of gold stretching toward the tree line. For a while it was, she said. Her voice carried no anger now, only reflection. When we first moved here, everything felt simple, she continued. I believed we had time to figure things out. Ducky listened carefully, his attention fixed entirely on her. But somewhere along the way, Lena said, I started feeling like my life had stopped moving. She turned back toward him. And I thought you didn't notice. Ducky met her gaze without hesitation. I noticed, he admitted. I just didn't know how to fix it. Silence settled briefly between them, yet it felt very different from the silence that had filled their house the night before. This pause carried thought rather than distance. Lena finally reached forward and lifted the camera from the table. The weight of it felt solid in her hands, heavier than the one she used to own. Her fingers moved automatically across the buttons and dials, recognizing the familiar design she had studied countless times online. You remembered exactly which one I wanted, she said. Ducky allowed a faint smile to appear. You talked about it a lot, he replied. Lena raised the camera slowly and looked through the viewfinder. The field came into sharp focus. The soft morning light, the distant fence, and the long rope of photographs behind her formed a scene she could easily imagine capturing forever. Then she shifted the camera slightly until Ducky stood in the center of the frame. Through the lens she saw the man she had married, tall, steady, and quietly determined. He looked nervous now, but he didn't move. Lena lowered the camera again. Why didn't you tell me about any of this earlier? She asked. Ducky rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I thought actions would mean more than promises, he said. I wanted to give you something real instead of just saying things would get better. Lena considered that answer carefully. For months she had believed their relationship was built on indifference and silence. Now she could see a different possibility emerging beneath the surface. "You should have talked to me," she said gently. "I know," Ducky replied. "I needed to hear what you were thinking." "I know that too." His honesty left no room for argument. Lena walked slowly away from the table and turned toward the line of photographs once more. Each image now carried a deeper meaning than it had minutes earlier. They were not random memories. They were proof that Ducky had been paying attention the entire time. "You really took all these?" she asked. "Most of them," he said. "Some I asked people to send me." Lena shook her head in quiet disbelief. "You planned this all night." "I had help from my mom," he admitted. That detail made Lena smile, faintly despite everything. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the tall grass around them. The movement carried the scent of warm earth and fresh morning air across the field. Lena returned to the table and picked up her suitcase, which Ducky had placed beside it earlier. For a long moment, she simply held the handle, staring down at it as if weighing the future itself. Then she set it gently on the ground. "I meant what I said last night," she told him. Ducky's expression tightened slightly. "I felt trapped," she continued, "and I couldn't keep living with that feeling." He nodded slowly. "But I was wrong about one thing," she added. "What was that?" "I thought you had stopped caring." The tension in his shoulders eased a little. "I never stopped," he said. Lena looked down at the camera in her hands again. "This changes things," she admitted. Ducky waited quietly, allowing her the space to decide. "I'm not leaving today," she said at last. The words seemed to release the breath he had been holding since the previous evening. "But that doesn't mean everything is fixed," Lena added. "I know. We still need to figure out how to talk to each other." He nodded again, more firmly this time. "I want that too." Lena studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt. Instead, she found determination. For the first time in months, hope began to settle into her thoughts. She lifted the camera once more and aimed it toward the sunrise stretching across the field. The shutter clicked softly. The sound echoed like the beginning of something new, capturing the exact moment when leaving had transformed into staying, and when a quiet act of love had changed the direction of both their lives.